I'm Nurit Ben. We're back here on Debrief. Vice President Mike Pence is in Japan launching what he's calling a wide-reaching economic dialogue that could end up with a bilateral trade deal. That's after President Trump dropped the Trans-Pacific Trade Pact. But like Trump's meeting with the Chinese president the week before, behind the business is the issue of North Korea.
Now, all options are on the table, and there they will remain. But President Trump and I and our administration believes the most productive pathway forward is dialogue among the family of nations that can isolate and pressure North Korea.
A day earlier, North Korea's ambassador to the UN issued his own warning.
If the United States dared to opt for the military actions, the crying out for preemptive air attack and the removal of the headquarters, the DPRK is ready to react to any mode of war desired by the American.
That statement coming a few days after Pyongyang held a massive military parade marking the 105th birthday of the country's founding father. On display there, what some weapons analysts are calling new types of intercontinental ballistic missiles. Beyond the proud display of arms, the tension between North Korea and the Trump administration has been palpable, coming back to the forefront during this administration. Where else but on Twitter? President Trump tweeting, "North Korea is looking for trouble. If China decides to help, that would be great. If not, we will solve the problem without them." How this White House will ultimately react to all that is far from clear. Robert Hathaway is a public policy fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center in Washington, joining us now. Robert, great to have you.
Thanks. Delighted to be with you.
So we have heard North Korea vowing to launch missile tests every week recently, but those kinds of threats and the North Korean nuclear threat in general is not new. Why do you think this has come to the forefront to this degree so far in the Trump administration?
Well, I think it partly is a function of a North Korea practice over the last year or so of increasingly frequent missile tests, greater emphasis on development of an intercontinental ballistic missile capability. Also, you have a new administration in Washington. No one is quite sure what to expect from the Trump administration. And I think there's a certain element of North Korean testing of the new administration to try to get its measure.
I want to get your opinion a little bit more on that, because we're talking about two unpredictable leaders, both in Washington and Pyongyang, obviously in very different ways. Do you think that Trump's radically different approach of issuing threats via Twitter, for example, can actually work on the North Korean regime?
Well, that remains to be seen, of course. It's certainly unorthodox. We've never had an American president like this before. But I think we shouldn't lose fact of the statements from the Vice President Pence, that you underlined in your news summary, where the Vice President said that this administration, the Trump administration, believes that a dialogue held with the family of nations of the world can produce results. Now, those words, the dialogue, family of nations, they sound very much like you would have heard from the Obama administration. So at this point, I simply think we don't know what to expect from the Trump administration.
Just very briefly, you're writing a book on leverage in foreign policy. Does President Trump have leverage in getting North Korea to scale back?
Well, he has very little leverage over North Korea. The hope in Washington is that the Chinese have some leverage over the North Koreans and that they can be persuaded or compelled to use that leverage with North Korea. But I think really the Americans have very little leverage at this point over Pyongyang.
Robert Hathaway in Washington, pleasure to have you. Thanks very much for weighing in. Still to come right here on Debrief, the aftermath of Turkey's referendum. From President Tayyip Erdogan's perspective, it's over and done, but the international body monitoring the vote and the EU are calling for an investigation. We'll take you live to demonstrations in Istanbul in just a minute.